Today, I'm fortunate to speak to Tammy Dunnett. Tammy is an ex-target of workplace bullying turned conflict resolution expert who helps organizations develop their communication edge to keep their top talent and rise above the competition. She guides employees and leaders on how to step into difficult conversations so they can keep relationships intact while boosting team morale, creativity, and productivity. As the founder and CEO of Relationship Revolution, Tammy is changing the way relationship is done, one conversation at a time, and is committed to building excellence among all team players through simple, actionable strategies designed for success. Welcome, Tammy, and thank you for joining me today to discuss how leaders can improve their conversational integrity, especially in conflict situations.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And first, before we go too far, I just want to really acknowledge and honor you for putting this all together, because I know how much work goes into it. And just for assembling such an amazing team here, I want to just thank you for including me in that lineup.
Of course, you are one of those very few people, Tammy, who I think is especially qualified to talk about conflict resolution and difficult conversations. So I'm very happy to have you here today. And I think you bring that special angle because you have a lot of experience from your private life and also from your work on how conflict happens and how to resolve it and how not to resolve it. So can you speak to that experience for a moment?
Yeah, and I think I should just start by saying that experience comes as a part of reflecting back on my journey. I didn't always have the pathways and the processes that I have today. In fact, I struggled. I thought I was doing really well, as many of us do growing up, because we're not officially taught how to communicate. It just happens. And we never really stopped to think about, well, I was able to solve that conflict. How did I do that? What worked well? And then when it doesn't go well, we never stop to think about what didn't go so well. Yeah. And it wasn't until I was almost 40 when I found myself in a relationship that I was struggling. I had not any tools to figure out how to get past the tension that was in that relationship. And I just kept doing the same thing that I had done for the previous, 40 years of my life, but it wasn't working. And it wasn't until 4 years after, it was a long journey underneath this supervisor where we were both caught up in this unrelenting relationship, really. We were both using the same method and neither of us was getting anywhere and neither of us knew how to change it. And despite asking for those resources and going to another supervisor and saying, listen, I'm struggling with this. How would you approach it? Can you help me how to figure this out? Nobody had the answers. Mm-hmm. And I was left with two different models. The medical model, which is, it's a valuable system. And they always say we don't want to medicalize workplace problems, but when it gets to a point that you need the support, you need to, indulge in that. And so I was doing.
Maybe just interrupt so that the audience understands where you come from, because you were also a trained nurse, aren't you?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was in healthcare, so I was a nurse as well, dealing with another nurse who was in the same specialty as me, but had a position power, so supervisory position, but not necessarily any more education than I had. Yeah. And so I was left with taking medications for sleep and anxiety and the recommendation for antidepressants. In my nursing brain, while that was all good to help me get better, it was telling me that it was making me stay numb to work in a place that was harming me. And it wasn't really the answer or the upstream solution. It was the Band-Aid for now. Yeah. And then the organizational practices, remediation and courses and training, but there was nothing in between us. There was no interpersonal model that people could access or give me access to. And so it was many years later when I was on my own healing journey. I studied lateral violence in healthcare through my master's of nursing. At the same time, I was teaching communication skills to licensed practical nurses in one of Canada's largest schools. And I started to see these gaps, and I started to intertwine my learning and my experience and the theory that I was teaching and getting results for students. And I'm like, this is what I was needing. This is what I needed when I was going through it, but it was not there for me.
So this is really amazing that today your model is available, and we will later tell everybody listening today where they can find more information about this. But it's also really relevant for me that you have that visceral experience of conflict, because you said that you had to take medication to sleep and so on. And I remember you also said that in your childhood you also experienced conflict and you didn't have the right role models, you said. And I think this is important as well as we go into adulthood, to have some models how to enter conflict situations and how to deal with them.
Yeah, you're right. I'll speak to that quickly. It's I don't think it's uncommon for us to have role models who don't have it figured out, because again, we're not taught in the school system. We kind of learn from others around us. And in my family, when my dad was struggling, he would use alcohol. And then when he was under the influence of alcohol, he became verbally abusive. And my mom's way of dealing with that was to gather up all the children and hide in the back room and get away from it. So as a young lady watching these two dynamics play out, I knew I didn't want either of them. And so what I had created in that space in my home is I became the aggressor, the asserter, and I would be in between my dad, who's drunk in his chair, my mom and all my siblings in the back room, and I'd be the one telling my dad, shut up, sit down, you're being stupid. Well, that doesn't work well in the workplace. So I didn't have
anywhere, I would say.
Yeah, right. And so when I got to the workplace, I'm like, okay, well, I can't be that girl who was telling my dad to shut up and be stupid. And I can't be my mom who avoids it, because then I'm just going to get abused all the time. And I didn't know how to figure out the path to
But I remember from your story that you went into this avoiding place because I remember you were bullied. Is that correct?
Yes.
And your initial reaction was to just go home. When
my very first when my very first experience with an employer yelling at me in front of a waiting room full of patients. So this is a medical organization. He was also the owner, like this was his business. He was also my boss.
There's a power distance that we are talking about. Let's just put it in perspective, because in conflict, this is going in the workplace, especially, this is going to be an important factor, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I just walked into work this morning and all of a sudden I got barraged with all these accusations of something I had done with. I didn't own any of it, to be honest. And all I did was like, I don't know what to do. And I grabbed my stuff when I went home. You're right. I did do the first thing that I thought of, which was to avoid, like my mom did.
Your mom did. So there's role modeling that we even subconsciously, we take on some level.
Yes, absolutely. But as soon as I got home, I realized this was my very first adult moment dealing with conflict in the workplace. I realized when I got home, okay, I either don't go back to work and I continue to avoid this and I'm out of a job. I go back to work and I say nothing and he continues to abuse me and I feel horrible about myself. Or there was a third option. And this is one that a lot of people don't really consider, because there's a lot of fear about speaking up and sharing your voice.
No wonder.
The third option was
power distance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The third option was to go back to work and say something and potentially be out of a job. Either way, either one of those outcomes, I could be miserable, or I could actually do something to try to influence it and get back to the happy. I loved working there. I'd been there for years. And this was my first time with him verbally abusing me. I knew he did it with others. And I had wished the others would speak up. And I tried to counsel them to do that. And they never had that within them. So I thought, here's my moment. If I don't speak up, my word is worth nothing. Like I've been telling them to do it this whole time, I need to buck up.
Precisely.
So part of that was my motivation. And I did go and I went super early because he was always in work early. And I went into his office and I waited in his chair so that I was on the offensive, not the defensive.
Smart.
And I had just scripted everything out that I wanted to say. And I was prepared to lose my job that day. But I knew if I was losing my job, I was going to do so knowing I fought for my safety and my respect.
And your sanity and your well-being and your health, right?
Yeah. And I wasn't rude. I just, in no uncertain terms, I said, what you did yesterday was not acceptable. I didn't have to come back here, but I chose to come back here, and you can never treat me that way again, essentially. And then I went and sat at my desk and I waited for him to come and say, go home. Mm-hmm. But he never did.
But he didn't. And so I think I read one of the statistics that 80% of bullying situations will end if the victim speaks up.
Yeah, 85 actually in healthcare is what I'm seeing is 85% of those conversations, the very first time you actually address somebody, that the offending behavior stops. And I'm so happy that I spoke up, because not only did I replicate that in my own life, I didn't know that stat till much later, but looking back on it, I can see the power of sharing a boundary and reclaiming something that's been fractured. And the hesitancy that people have, as you mentioned, there's hierarchy, there's I need a job, right? So not only is he my boss, but he also writes my paycheck and I have bills to pay.
Yes. And so I think this consequence that I always teach people that conflict is not so bad providing that you accept consequences.
Yeah, that's a great point, because not all conflict is bad. In fact, we need conflict. Conflict is what helps us to see different possibilities and potentials, solutions, and be creative. Without it, life is pretty boring. It's when conflict starts to consume our thoughts in a negative way and to impact our relationships in ways that are less productive. And then we start to see retention issues, morale issues, more mistakes, more errors, people not respecting others. That's when, those are the signs that you've got conflict that's actually eroding away as opposed to building teams.
Is this where you would say that then we are dealing with a toxic workplace?
Toxic workplace is such a... I just want to come back first to the word bully. I think, we have a lot of stats that show us supervisors, leaders, executives, people in supervisory positions are most at risk of being called a bully. Over 70% of the claims in the workplace label the boss as being the bully. And it's not to say that there aren't true bullies out there, but in my experience, knowing that 85% of the behaviors stop with the first conversation, it is my wholehearted belief in my experience that we have fewer bullies out there than bad conversations, bad days.
That's a very good
Yeah, we are all capable of the behaviors of a bully. I mean, if you're a parent, you've probably said to your child something like, eat your vegetables or else you're going to bed. And they want to go, why? And then you'll go to your room. Like, those are bully behaviors, and we don't even realize that we do that in our own family. And then they carry over into the workplace. But our intention is not necessarily to bully. And that's a really critical thing.
So you mean that they are not aware? Those leaders who might be labeled as a bully, they don't realize what they are doing?
Yeah, and it's hard for people to realize because we have this belief system. It's called the fallacy of should. They should know better. They should know that when they talk to me that way, it would hurt me. But the problem is they don't know. And it would look like on the outside, like, how could anybody not know? And that's kind of what makes it really difficult to have the conversation, because then we think that they should change their behaviors without me even having to say something. But a fallacy of should keeps us with blinders on, and we're not looking for any opportunities to say that maybe they actually aren't that way all the time, because we've made a judgment and we haven't actually verified it and we haven't done the work to have a conversation around it.
So I agree with you. And then I wanted to ask you also, speaking of they should know that. Isn't it putting the responsibility for the solution on the side of the leader? The leader should know that they are not supposed to behave like this. The leader should know that they are not supposed to shout at me. But aren't I then, well, I wouldn't say being convenient, but in a way it is. It's not my responsibility to fix this.
Yeah, right. Exactly that. It's a way to distance myself from owning any responsibility as to the solution. Because it takes two people, and there's perceptions. There's a whole lot of things that come into a relationship, how I'm feeling that day. It may not be anything to do with you, Isabel. It's just that I'm having a bad day. You come and ask me a question. Now I think, like, back off, lady. I'm going to get my work done because I've got all these other stressors. And I carry that forward into our next conversation, but it actually had nothing to do with you. So, that's just an example of how our outside circumstances can influence in between. But if we don't stop and have a conversation, if we don't get curious, then we can have more conflict than collaboration.
And speaking of curious, I think you have 5 pillars of dealing with conflict situations. Can you tell us about them? Because curiosity is one of them.
Yeah, I love C words. Caring, curiosity, and connection are 3 of my personal values. And I know that when I'm on that island, I call it my island of connecting with others. If I get knocked off that, which we all do, you're going along, life's going well, and all of a sudden something comes, boomerang comes in, you're like, whoa, that didn't feel good. And you're knocked off your island either a little bit or a lot. You're way over in rage and anger and frustration and what the hell happened? You got to find a way to come back to that. So part of the things that I talk about is being very clear in your words. I think Brene Brown says to be kind is to be clear, right? Don't mince words. Don't beat around the bush. Now, I do know that some people's styles is to tell a story. It's a relational experience. Other people don't feel safe, so they'll test the waters. Leaving that aside, when you finally get to the message, be clear. Don't use abstraction. And I think in a workplace, we see a lot of that. In fact, a colleague came to me once and said, they tell me I'm being rude. I'm like, oh, okay. Always? Ever? Did they give you any examples? No, they just told me I'm being rude and I have to change my practice. I'm like, that's pretty abstract. It doesn't give you any information as to when, where, what was happening. You really can't reflect on it and identify what the core issue was so that you can change it. So that's what I mean by be clear.
So feedback really needs to be precise.
Yes. Clear and concise, absolutely. So you don't want to be spending an hour just talking about the weather and how are your kids and let's build this relationship because I'm afraid to tell you what I really need to tell you, and then cram it into the last few minutes and then off they go. You want to get to the point.
Avoiding, let's maybe unpack it for people. This talking about the weather and how the kids are doing. This is the avoiding part. And then in the last 5 minutes, the essence of what I'm trying to say, this is like throwing a hand grenade, isn't it?
Yeah, because they're like, oh, the pressure's here for me now, and I just got to get it out, and I got to get it out of here because it's like too scary for me.
And then, just using this metaphor, throwing a hand grenade anywhere is not going to end well, is it?
No.
Just so that people understand, these mental patterns that we are unpacking here. Because there will be a lot of people listening to this and recognizing the pattern once we put the finger on it.
And with that clear and concise, just mentioning the hand grenade, I don't ever like a blind side. So when you're asking someone to meet with you, be clear and concise as to what it is you want to talk to them about. Even if you think that the subject is going to be alarming to them, disarm them so that they can come in authentically. It is of no service if you don't tell them, I'd like to talk to you about what happened at work yesterday with this person. I've heard that there were some things. They can go, what? People are talking about me? I've done something wrong. Let them have that emotional reaction so they can get out of their thinking or back into their thinking brain when they come to sit with you. And then they can be curious. They can ask questions as well because they can focus.
And I think, Tammy, this is also very important when we speak about, going back. When we talk about one incident, let's not mix up many incidents from the past, like what you did 5 years ago.
That's right. Yeah. I call that the kitchen sink or the dirty water bath. A lot of people are, when they feel like things aren't going their way, they'll bring in all these other past pieces as evidence, but it actually creates a very confused space. And when the mind is confused, it can't get to yes. It won't get to yes because it's like over in all these different areas. And so being clear and concise.
Well, right?
Sorry?
It will make us defensive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's no clarity.
And then there's no case, because what are we really talking about? What I did 5 years ago, 1 year ago, or yesterday?
Right. And for the person who is on the receiving end of something like that, they've just sat down, you've told them you're going to talk about what happened yesterday, and now you're talking about 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, how you can't trust them in the future. Not only do they get defensive, but they get defeated. They feel hopeless because they're like, I cannot physically prove to you I'm anything other than because you just keep me in this box. You haven't seen all the good work I've done. So then they start to lose morale. They start to not care less. They start to look for an exit. And all of a sudden, you're out of really great employees. I've seen so many good employees leave because of these kind of conditions.
Sure. So coming back, so you need to be very concise. You need to also be very precise. This is not a C word, but I will stick with it. I would say you need to be assertive.
Yes. Now, assertive, it's a range, right? So I think when people think of assertive, it's like, sit down, we're going to talk about this, and that's how it's going to go. But I want to let me match confidence up with assertive, because I think confidence is a really big key. And people think confidence is shoulders back, head high. You're standing strong in your position and you're not going to waver. But confidence is so much more than that. Confidence is being able to come in and be compassionate. So that's another one of the C's that we talk about. Being compassionate and being heart-centered and curious enough to know, tell me what you were thinking when this happened. Let me understand what was going on in your world when you made this decision. Because when you get more information, you can get to a better solution faster, as opposed to coming in and being the one with the answers and the one with the pathway. You're just going to end up creating more tension.
Yes, this is just telling people how it's going to go.
Yeah.
And we need collaboration, and this is one of your C's.
Absolutely. The fastest way to get to collaboration is through connection. The fastest way to get to connection is through conversations, and to be curious to get into that conversation. So if you're curious enough to understand what was going on in their world when this happened, long ago we used to be blame-centered. And I probably shouldn't say long ago, it probably still exists, where we're looking for the person who made the mistake. So we can correct the deficiency, fire them, whatever it is they need, remediate them, and the problem is solved. But that is such a Band-Aid approach. And we have learned over history that that is not the best approach, because it never solves the problem. It looks at a person and makes them the problem. But you have to start peeling back the layers and looking at what was happening in the workplace. What are the policies? Was there any training? What was the communication like among the team? There's so many more things going on. Were they working overtime? Look at the context, get really curious, ask more questions, continue to figure it out, because then you can solve the problem instead of put a Band-Aid on an issue.
That's also a very valid point. Conflict doesn't happen in a vacuum.
That's right.
This environment around it, whether this is the team or whether this is the culture of the team or the department or even the whole company or even the culture of the leader. Mm-hmm. Because this can also set the tone for how communication flows, how problems are solved, are they being discussed or swept under the carpet?
That's right.
So yeah. It's the environment in which people function that can be more conflict prone than in other situations or cultures.
Yeah, and leaders have a real opportunity to set that tone. And I know there's time constraints. You know, leaders have got a lot of different priorities and things that they need to do that an employee doesn't have on their plate. And they have a bigger awareness. They've got the broader perspective that an employee doesn't necessarily need to have. So they have different, you know, things that motivate them in the day. And sometimes it's hard to carve out the time. Now, I've heard from some managers that they spend up to 80% of their work week dealing with interpersonal problems. Wouldn't it be great to get connected into a system that you can actually shrink that down while not only are you dealing with these more effectively, but you're passing on that skill set by role modeling, because we talked about earlier, nobody has these role models, by encouraging space to have conversations and making it safe to say, hey, let's talk about what's going on and where can we find the solutions together. Right. And then soon you're reclaiming your time so you can actually do your work more effectively and put yourself in a better position, both as a professional and as a leader.
So what I see, Tammy, is that this, how did you call it? Let me just look at my notes. Conversational integrity. This is how you call it. And this is the system also that you teach, right? So how can leaders learn this? Because here's the good news. These are skills. These are innate abilities that we are born with. We all have the capacity to learn these things. So how can the leaders learn and where can they learn?
Yeah, I think conversational integrity is so important for everybody. It's really an art and a science, right? We can learn all the put A before B and then before C and the frameworks and the policies and practices, but if you don't actually implement and see what works with this unique person, and that's the integrity part, is knowing that where you're coming from in the morning. So mine is care, connection, curiosity. And I know that when I'm budged off that island, I need to get back to that before I connect with you. Because if I come to you from this area of frustration, nothing good is going to come from it. I'm probably going to come across rough. I'm going to be very directive. I'm probably not going to give any good feedback. I'm just going to be all blame centered. And that's not going to create a very conducive relationship. So for me, being in integrity, I need to recognize when I'm off my island and say, I need maybe just 5 minutes. Let me just go see if I can regroup myself, and then I can come back in authentically so that we can actually connect in a very collaborative way.
So is the self-management skill what we were talking about?
Yeah, a lot of this is about reflecting on our own practice and being aware of our own presence in the moment. Knowing that should you not be able to carve out that space, maybe it is you're having a bad day, you've kind of hurled out some really quick order, go do this, and you haven't really considered how that might land. You can also come back and revisit. There's always an opportunity to come back and revisit a conversation, to explore it more, to understand it more, to give more clarity, to reconnect.
That's really very important, that we can revisit those moments where we might have hurt somebody's feelings. But I think we would need to be aware of this. And there are two ways to this, right? It's either we notice and we register that, we pick the bleep on our radar, or our employees, in the case of a leader, will come and tell us.
Yeah. And you know what? Yeah. So here's how I learned that I needed to change my communication, and it had to come from within, is because I was bullied in one workplace and I left there after several years. I thought leaving would be healing. And it wasn't, because a couple of years later in my new workplace, I found myself with a new bully. And it's very common for us to go, oh my God, how is it I find all the bullies in the workplace? How is it they find me? Right? And then you really have to go, okay, what's the common denominators in all of these relationships, and start to explore them. Be willing to pull back the layers and say, okay, how am I showing up? I think I'm doing it right, but obviously there's something I'm doing that's not coming across in a good, well-received way. So what do I need to change? That's where it first started for me, is that self-reflection. And then I needed to tap into coaching, because I didn't know. I had been begging for somebody to coach me when I was in the middle of all that really ugly feelings. And now that I'm in this new 2 years later, I find myself again in this. I'm like, okay, I can't do this on my own. I now know I need to find somebody to help me, reveal the blind spots, show me some different ways, role play and practice, and really kind of figure out what it is I want to be seen as. How do I want to show up? And how do I validate that that's what they're getting?
And how do you change the patterns that you keep bringing into those dynamics, right?
Yeah. So and it's so common because we never check it out. Growing up, you've got friends on the playground, you hang out with your buddies after school, your workmates, and things go well until they don't go well. And that's usually when we start to think about our communication.
So this is one of my favorite C's in conflict resolution, which is contribution. Recognizing your contribution system. Because, I'm old enough and experienced enough to know that where there is conflict, at least two parties have contributed. Even though very often my clients will say, no, it's them.
Yes.
It's them. If they changed, everything would be fine. If they fixed that, it would be okay. If they didn't do this or that, or if they did that, this would be great. And then I always hold the mirror to them and I say, okay, how about your contribution? Can you see anything where you could have contributed? And from my professional experience, very often it's the initial response is no. I am just the victim here. They are the aggressors. They are the bullies. They have done this or that. How do you see that? And how can we help people recognize the contribution better and faster?
Yeah, I love that question. I love the word contribution as well, because it's both on the positive and the negative side of this. Like, how did we get to where we are? What did you do? What did you say? What did you, like your nonverbals? What did you not say? Like, let's examine all of that stuff to see if there was a change somewhere, we may have got a different result. But when people are focused outward and they're in that victim, this is happening to me, we need to be able to shift that thinking process from life is happening to me to life is happening for me. So there's something for me to learn here. And maybe it's just learning about them.
Wonderful.
Like, how did you get to this decision, as opposed to blaming them? That sounds very much blame-centered, which is what I try to steer people away from. And I like to steer towards connecting and collaborating, curiosity to see where can we solve this together. Yeah.
That's really amazing. And I think it can be on both sides, right? Leaders can also blame, and they can say, oh, if my team only did what I expected them to do, there wouldn't be conflict between us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another perception, right? So the leader has a perception of their team's abilities. And when the team doesn't perform to the level that they normally do, there can be questions. And that's just the simple, safe starter saying, hey guys, typically when we work on projects like this, these kind of results are what I get from you, but that's not what I got this time. What's going on? Be curious, as opposed to saying it's your fault and you need to work harder. Cancel your plans for the weekend, folks. You're coming in. You can actually maybe get them to come to that conclusion on their own by just opening up that safe conversation and acknowledging and saying, here's what I'm observing. There's a gap. Fill me in. Because maybe I haven't given you enough instruction. Maybe you don't have the right resources and you're trying to make something up. Like, what is the difference?
So we have another C here, Tammy. I think communication.
Communication wraps all of those. Yes. It's the most important thing, actually, and we tend not to do it well. And if we're doing it well, we don't evaluate what is going well. And when it goes bad, we don't evaluate why it's going bad. We just think it's somebody else's problem.
Yeah. It's really interesting how many contributing factors and how many of those C's have we identified so far?
It's been a lot, actually. I think we've added on to them.
You've got a book on the C's of conflict resolution, I think.
Conflict communication, there's two. We've talked about being clear and concise, and giving people the gift to know what you want to talk to them about ahead of time so that they can connect in with what they want to share and how they want to explore things. Clear, concise, compassionate. I think compassionate is just being human and knowing that if you tell them what this is about ahead of time, then they can come in wholeheartedly. I've been blindsided a few times in my career where you walk into an office expecting it to be a meeting with one, and ER is sitting there, and you're like, what is going on? I didn't even know there was a problem. So you don't even really get a chance to speak and explore it. You're already accused before you get to the meeting. That's never a good way to treat your employees.
So true. And I'm thinking about a situation. Recently, a client came to me with feedback that he needs to, how was it put exactly? That he needs to be better at conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And when I started analyzing his situation, it became very clear to me that he is, his strategy is to avoid very strongly. And he told me when I really pushed him at some point, he said, well, you know, I don't want to deal with conflict. Conflict is bad. Conflict is always bad. What would you say to this client who is
I would get curious
to conflict?
I would get curious, first of all. I'd want to know what were his past experiences that makes his decision that all conflict is bad. So I would dive into that first of all and explore where those connections are so that we can start to unwind them. You know, because he's got a threat response. So for him, when he sees conflict, the anxiety sets in. He's a fighter or a flighter. We all have those two options. And when you start to look at people and you start to ask yourself, oh, are they in a flight or fight mode? You recognize that they are trying to protect themselves because they feel that there's a threat. And so his flight, avoiding, there's a threat to something for him. I'd want to explore and see, what is it that you are concerned about? Is this reputation? Have you been fired before? Has there been a grievance against you as a result? And those things are really hard on all of us to know, that somebody hates us or is so upset with us that they're going to go to the lengths of putting in a grievance and filing a complaint. That's really hard on our ego.
Mm-hmm. But also, obviously, this is a very unnecessary complication if you were a team leader. So, you know, the question that I would have to you as a conflict resolution expert is, what is this balance that leaders would need to strike between being the leader, the person who needs to be decisive and give clear instructions, and somebody who has compassion and understands and finds the time to dissolve conflict before it really explodes?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good question. I don't know if balance is the right way, because we are a blend of everything, right? So each one of us can avoid. That's the classic term, avoid or accommodate. I tend to use the word pause. My pausers need time and space to figure things out before they go forward. The reason I don't like avoid is because it's become a destination, and people will say, oh, he's an avoider, he's never going to do anything. And it becomes really stuck, like there's no opportunity to show you to be something different. And I have never met an avoider who actually doesn't want resolution. They just don't know how. So we all have the ability to pause and need space and time. We have the ability to be curious, and we all get into some conversations where we'll just speak our mind and how it's going to happen. And other times we'll just go and take care of things. So we're a blend of all of them. We have a dominant lean. And for this particular case, if his dominant lean is to avoid it, our closest allies are the two beside in my model. So for him to make the next stretch would be either go into the ask, understand. That would be the next safest place, or to do something about it. And doing something about it would solidify a leadership decision. Leaders have to make decisions. But the best way to get the team to buy into your decision is through connection. They need to be connected to you and know who you are so they can trust your decisions. Otherwise, they'll just be like, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. And so it's about investing in your people. Walk past them and spend 2 minutes and ask about, how are the kids today? What's going on in your world? What projects are you working on? How can I support you? What do you need from the team so you can be successful? So invest in them and they will invest in you.
So this is also emotional intelligence and vulnerability. As you mentioned Brené Brown, she talks a lot about vulnerability. And I think leaders are so afraid of this.
Yeah. We all have our own definition of what a leader should be, right? Something, again, we're not taught. We're role modeling after those who we emulate or who we think have done a really good job at it, but we don't know how they got there. So we're just figuring it out. We're just humans figuring it out as we go, but it's taking the time to evaluate. I want to go back and ask my team. I was trying to be really compassionate today, and I wonder if that came across. I need to make sure that what I'm doing verbally, non-verbally, time-wise, the questions I ask, is it landing in the way that I hope it to land? Invest in you, invest in understanding your communication by enrolling them, and you will have that connection.
I am thinking about something else. And I'm thinking about what triggers conflicts. And we talked already about, those models of avoidance, for example, or accommodation. And I'm thinking about something else here, which is boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you can talk about boundaries and how having boundaries or setting clear boundaries and not doing that, how can this prevent conflict and trigger conflict and make it worse?
Yeah, boundaries is another, we could talk for hours on boundaries. They can be rigid, and some need to be rigid, right? So in terms of employee and employer, there's a boundary. So if you're friends outside of the office, which is really sometimes where a lot of the boundaries get crossed, and I don't know why I go to this example, but I know some colleagues who were friends, and inside the office, they still acted like friends, and they had these privileges of information or privileges of space. You could use my office when I'm not here. That looks really bad to the other employees. Favoritism, they're going to get promoted, and anytime they got something good, it was because of a friendship. So some boundaries need to be hard and fast. And you need to have those conversations if a friendship is the issue about what is acceptable at work, and know that when I'm in this role, this can't happen. You don't get to use my office. You don't get to bypass the process.
So it's again clear communication.
Yeah. And then the other thing is some boundaries are meant to flex, right? So if you think about your relationships with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, those boundaries shift and change depending on what's happening. Sometimes you'll allow them in, you'll talk about the personal issues you're having because there's a trust and a respect there. And other times you're like, I don't want to talk to you about this today. I need it to be a little bit bigger, my boundary today. And I just want you to respect that. So boundaries aren't always meant to be rigid, but those that are meant to be rigid should be communicated clearly and concisely with compassion. Yeah.
And I think another step is that we keep them consistently.
Yeah. And you know what? If you don't, we're all human.
That's a good question. What happens if we don't?
Yeah, we're not robots, and things will get breached. You revisit the conversation and you talk about it and say, you know what? I maybe had a moment of weakness where I thought we could do this, but it's making me feel uncomfortable. I need to reestablish this boundary. Yeah. You can always revisit and have a conversation.
How can boundaries drive conflict in the workplace, or unclear boundaries? Not only individuals. I think, leader in the team.
Yeah, just the hierarchical nature of a relationship, first of all, that's a boundary that can already set you up to be a higher risk perception of conflict, or that you're abrasive as a result of you have the authority, I'm just the employee, I have to do what you say. So, but it's about being open about those roles and recognizing that as a team, we are all unique and we have our own special area that we bring to the team. And there'll be different pay salaries and different titles that go with that. But this team doesn't function if you're not a part of it. Right? So it doesn't have to be hierarchical. People are trying to move more towards the lateral kind of where we are working as a team, but that we recognize each person brings a different specialty, and without them, this team isn't going to function. So in terms of boundaries adding to conflict, I think if you don't really explore how the team works together. Everyone's in a silo, and then you get all these teams that are like, that's not my job, that's their job. But if we can actually say, oh, that's a great question, the specialist for this would be that person, why don't we go and involve them? It's a very different feel.
Yeah. But you mentioned the silos, and these are the very unhealthy boundaries, those that are very rigid.
Yes.
Where nothing comes across. And then there's no communication and there's no connection. So if there's no human connection, obviously there's conflict by design, I think.
Yeah, I think there's some organizations where silos are needed. I think of the military. I spent 10 years in the military, and I think of maybe even industrial organizations where there's productivity lines, like you are in, this is your job, there's no moving out, there's no creativity, you're going to do this role and this is your title, and etc. But the leader of that silo, they're the one who's going to make them either feel like they're a silo or that they're part of the team. That's
a great distinction. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. I'm thinking, what other questions could I ask you, because our time is running out. How can
listen,
yes?
I was going to say, why don't I share a little bit about the download I want to offer people? Because what I find is that
before you go there, Tammy, I just have one more question. So, just so that we prove to people that conflict is not all bad. And honestly, today I cannot speak properly. But how can conflict be a catalyst for good teamwork?
Oh, I think that's, if you take that perspective right off the hop, that there's something going on here that we need to solve, all the brains need to be involved in that solution to the degree in which we can involve them. Sometimes there are moments where the leader has to make a decision. And if you have connection with your team already and trust in your team, they won't second guess it. They're going to already, okay, he's got to make the decision. It just has to happen today. You know, I think of in healthcare, there are times when I need to be very aggressive and assertive with people. And then there's times where I can be more collaborative and curious. It just depends on what's happening in the moment. But when we've got like a trauma happening and I have to like bark orders to people to get things done, there's no doubt in the intention because the team already knows how we function.
That's great.
Right? So there isn't nobody feels like they've been yelled at. It's just like they all recognize the stress of the moment. And this team, we all have specialties and you're going to go grab me and whatever it is I need and bring it back to me now. I don't have time to figure out what your context is. I don't need to know what your context is. You need to just know you have to support the team.
This is a different thing because you're talking about situational stress, but I'm asking about conflict. How can conflict drive good teamwork?
How can conflict drive good teamwork?
There's confrontation, you know, and people express strongly their opinions and they disagree strongly with each other. Is there any benefit of that?
Well, if it's going to take away from the team, then there's no benefit. If there isn't a process in place for them to explore what it is that they're looking to have, like what would your resolution be? What would your best ideal condition be for this problem? And if mine's way over here, then how are we going to get to something in the middle ground if we don't have a process for that? And it will erode and people will start to take camp and they'll start to gather their tribes and then they're going to have internal wars among employees. And then that's when you start to see us versus them in the workplace. So it's really about setting the stage for, and the boundaries. I think the boundaries need to be there in terms of we're focused on the company goals first. It's always mission, unit, self, like in the military. So the mission is whatever the organization has to achieve. That's our first benchmark. When we can hit that, then we can look at the unit. What does our organization, the people here right now need? If we can hit that, then we look at how do we help self. I don't know if that answered your question. It just made me think of how when we have two people in opposite camps, then we need to redirect them back to the core values. How are their personal values aligned with that? And then bring them in that way.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really like that and I appreciate your explanation. So yes, I know that our time is running out. I wish we could really talk for hours and we definitely could. Yeah. So do tell us about, your work and where can people find more about your model? And I know that you have your free gift for value for our listeners.
Yeah, so what I get most is, what do I say? That's the question I always get asked is, well, how do I say? How do I talk about this? So what I've got is a safe conversation guide. It actually comes from Dr. Martha Griffin, her research. And in there, I've adapted it a little bit. So it's not always necessarily healthcare focused, but just general conversation focused. Great. So the 10 most offensive behaviors you would see in a workplace. So rolling of eyes or sarcastic remarks. How can I confidently speak up, knowing that what I'm going to say is not going to be a defense arousing statement? Because that's usually what stops people. They're afraid to create more negative energy. Mm-hmm. So there's 10 statements that you can use word for word. You don't have to think about it. Print it, put it on your cubicle or wherever you're working. And then you can just say, hey, when I notice this, X, Y, Z, follow the path.
Yes. It's really wonderful. And I really appreciate that you have put this gift together. And I also love that you've added there those behaviors like rolling of the eyes, which we accept as a norm. It's like we don't stop to think about it, right? But these are microaggressions. And so we
all do them though. That's the thing. Like we all do these behaviors. So it's really about when you say and you have this opportunity to explore things, hey, when I see things like this, it makes me have more questions. Can we talk about it? Because it's not how I learned it. Well, that's a really safe way to say what you're doing is I don't understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, but I want to learn more. And then I can integrate it into my knowledge or reject it and carry on with my path. Mm-hmm.
Great. So this is the free gift. And we're going to put the link where people can download it.
Yes.
And where can people find more about your work and your models and how to work with you?
Yeah, I mean, so relationshiprevolution.ca is where you can find a lot of my stuff. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I think you have all those links as well for people to join me at LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm not very good at, I'm just going to say. I'm working on it.
It's for the audience. They can choose where they can find you.
Yes.
And what is the best way to work with you? The most practical way.
Yeah, that's great. So I do a few different things. I do group coaching. I also do leadership executive coaching, working with people who have negative perceptions, like they've been called an abrasive leader. So we want to really manage that to make sure that how you're coming across intentionally in your heart is being landed in the same way as opposed to being taken as abrasive. So yeah, I do executive coaching for abrasive leaders and then coaching for employees and those kind of junior leaders who are just kind of starting.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Tammy, for talking to me today, for explaining all those difficult things around conflict and conflict resolution, for all your tips and advice. And I hope we can talk some other time about those issues that we didn't have time for today.
Yeah, it's a big topic.
It's a big topic, exactly. So I do hope that we will have time and opportunity to speak about this again. And for now, thank you so much. And all the best.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Goodbye.